Hey guys, back again with another very early morning video. It's 5:17 where I'm at, and I've been seeing some discussions from YouTubers about expectations, and I kind of want to discuss that because I think the concept of expectations is getting confused. And I feel like we need to definitely have that discussion on what an expectation is and what should be good or bad expectations for the Bulls. Now let's start with this. An expectation typically occurs before something happens. It's what you think will happen. Okay? And sometimes expectations can change. And so when I hear a lot of videos going on about the expectations, I don't see them giving the probability of, something like, let's say an injury happens. What is the expectation then? It's just, okay, this is said expectation, yada, yada, yada. And I'm saying that because expectations are allowed to change due to circumstance. So let me give you an example. Let's just say there's a YouTuber or person out there that says, hey, Bulls, I project them to win 50 wins this season, right? Okay, fine. But let's just say that, first 20 some odd games, their record is 15-5. Okay, they're pretty much on track to obliterate that. They'll get more than 50 wins. Because if my math is correct, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, by the time they hit 60 wins or 60 games, they should be at around 35-15. I mean, not 35-15, but like 40-20. You know what I'm saying? And they would still have 22 games to go. The likelihood that they'll break 50 is very high. But when would your expectations change for that? You know what I'm saying? What would be, the expectation then? Okay. You might say, okay, well, I expected them to get 50. Okay, but let's just say they get, 55 now and they're the number one seed. Maybe at the beginning of the season you thought, okay, they would be a fourth or fifth seed. When are you allowed to change those expectations? And so we start looking at things, there's media publications that are giving their opinion on this. The betting places are giving their opinions. I've seen them being as low as out of play-in team, and I've seen them being as high as a fourth or fifth seed for the most part. And so you put all that together, you're kind of getting a mix of thought processes or thought processes. All right, sorry about that. Had to get me some food before I head to work. But yeah, man. When do the expectations change, or when are you allowed to change your expectations? So, for me, I have my own personal expectations, and then I have what I consider social expectations. My own personal expectations, you guys should know by now. I've mentioned them on my channel. But I think there's also the social expectations, which is what I was kind of talking about, where, the Vegas books, all the other betting places, general consensus has the team looking one way. And social expectations can kind of be broken down into by fan bases and stuff. Like the Chicago Bulls fans probably view the team in a better way than, say, the media does. Bulls fans probably say, hey, this is a 50-win team kind of, or upper 40s, whereas the media might say, play-in team level, 500 team. You know what I'm saying? So expectations differ from place to place depending on who you're asking. So with that being said, let's talk about what I think should be reasonable expectations. This is not going to necessarily be my personal opinion about what I personally think they are. This is what I think the general consensus will be. And I think this, I'm going to try to give this in the most balanced way I can. I want to account for most things. And I want to be fair to both people who are not fans of Chicago Bulls, casual fans, or even the betting world as well. So when we look at this team, mainly the only pieces from last year that truly remain are Pat Will, Kobe White, and Zach LaVine. And I'm talking about the beginning of the year. If we add Vooch, then you can add Vooch into that discussion as well. So this team had a massive overhaul, probably the most turnover of any team in the league this year, bar none. And we got a couple of pieces here, Lonzo, DeRozan, Caruso, Troy Brown, a couple others. I'm not going to get into naming everybody, but they got a lot of weapons. And the question you got to ask yourself is this: what would have been this team's expectation with the team from last year? Let's assume this team didn't change, and they still had, what they went into the offseason with, what this team looked like. And I would assume that this team would probably look like a 37-41 win team. And I'm going to say that because they got 31 wins last year, if I'm not mistaken. And yeah, they only had Vooch acclimated for a short period of time. And so I think that they would have a much better record, which is why I say a 37-40 win team, because then you got a couple, you get Vooch added there, and he gets acclimated and yada, yada, yada. But I don't think that they still are beyond, say, a play-in team-ish level. You see what I'm saying? And so I would say that would be fair. And if you consider where everybody else got better at this past season, I think that would be, even more fair to say. Because hell, even Cleveland got better despite, them losing, can't think of his name right now. I got y'all know who I'm talking about. He was in the trade to Portland. They got Laurie back, they re-signed, Jared Allen and stuff like this. You got teams who are kind of below them that got better, essentially. So now that we kind of got a baseline-ish, somewhere between 37 and 37 and 41 wins, which would be a 500 team. What can we expect of them now with the changes that they've made? And so here's what I think. If you add Lonzo Ball to this team, I think the expectation would have been to have a winning season. What I mean is, let's go through with the Lonzo trade, no other additions at this point. No Caruso, no DeRozan yet, just add Lonzo. I think the expectation would be that at minimum they're a 500 team. At best, they're like a 44-win team, which is still a winning record. Still not bad. They can still be in a play-in range. And I think that the team would still look pretty good overall, when you think about where they were last year, because the point guard play was kind of like abysmal. So now you got a clear upgrade and someone whose skill set complements your best players in Vooch and Zach LaVine. Don't mind me out here driving and shifting through lanes, y'all. But, so I think that's fair. Then we add in, let's say, Caruso. I'm not going to say Caruso is going to be a big swinger as far as how things works, but I think his addition adds more consistency. And for more consistency at this point, I think, he's going to shift them about a game or two. So, maybe 45, 46 wins. And then you get a guy, you may go through with the trade to get DeRozan. Where does that put you? I don't think DeRozan moved the needle for as many people, in Vegas and the books and just in general. Unless you're a Bulls fan, I don't think, outside of that, most people view it like as a major big time signing like a Kawhi Leonard. And so I would think that his increase would be marginal at that point. But I think people would give him his respect for what he is and what he's done and say, you're somewhere between like a 47 and 50 win team. So what's a reasonable expectation here? This team should be, for all intents and purposes, a playoff level team. And it shouldn't be a playoff level team, trying to get it, away from the playing game. They should be firmly ahead of the playing game. They should be at least a solid 6th seed or 5th seed. I think that's fair given the circumstances. Now, if we start saying like injuries start creeping up, okay, that affects that greatly, and you can see that come down. But I'll put it like this, I don't think they have as much room for a margin of error in terms of losing certain guys. You lose Vooch, you can start Bradley, and now you're more defensively sound, but you lose that floor spacing, which makes it harder to attack the paint. So you're trading off more defense and you're going to get worse at getting, in the paint. So, that's something you got to consider. And that for a long period of time can affect you in certain matches, like the Utah Jazz matchup, or say the Hawks matchup with Clint Capella, when you got a big that wants to stay in the paint. Hell, even the Lakers matchup, unless they put AD at the 5. Those kind of things affect those matchups very well, or greatly. So the timing of certain injuries can matter too. But I think somewhere around a 47 to 50 win rate level is probably a fair assessment. Again, now whether that's going to be in a playing game or not will be determined on how the rest of the league performs. But I think if you're in 50, you should be as far away from the playing game as possible. Once you're at 47, I think you might be teetering closer to the playing game. And that kind of depends on, the totality of the East. And for a lesser extent, in general, I think the league. But I think play-in level teams are probably going to be somewhere between 45 and like 37. I think that's probably going to be play-in level. So you're going to be close if you get injured, but you should have a good enough of a cushion outside of that. Now, let's talk about middle of the season, okay? When do people's expectations for teams start changing? I would say around a third or a half of the league's games being played is when we start getting a more solid view of what the teams look like. So I think around that time, which would probably be somewhere, if we're starting in October, I'd say around January. As long as we don't have any major COVID protocols, have to shut down the year, I'd say around January, you start getting a pretty good look as to what this is starting to shape up to be. Okay? They're going to be MVP candidates emerging and other things as well. You got a pretty good cushion of games to sit there and make your assessment. I would say expectations for the Bulls are going to change based on that. Now, it's quite possible if they get off to a really good start, let's say they go 16-4 in the first 20 games, those things will change much more immediately. And let me say this too. I'm glad I mentioned that statement. Because the bulk of their games are in the beginning, if they do really good in the beginning, it is going to greatly shift, the expectations of this team. See, it would be different if we're playing a bunch of teams like Detroit and Cleveland in the first half of the schedule. Within the first 10 games, we're already playing teams that were like in the playoffs. And then throughout the entire month of pretty much November and like half of December, it's pretty much all playoff or championship level teams. So it's better if they start off strong, because it means they're beating the teams who have the expectations to be champions, and that makes their winning look better. It'd be different if you were beating up on Orlando and Cleveland and Minnesota, and you would those were like the bulk of your games, and you were like 16-4, like, well, they ain't played anybody. But if you're beating up the Lakers, Brooklyn, Philly, you know, the Celtics, Miami, Golden State, Phoenix, those teams, Denver, those teams carry so much more weight to me. And I would think that would also reflect with Vegas. So you would see the expectations of this team shift based on that. Which, let's talk about the rest of the schedule. Since their schedule kind of evens out around like January, February, like late January, February, if they start to get injured, that would be the best time to do it, or to be hurt. Because you're playing much more weaker teams. And so you have a better chance to like sustain or hold out. If we start off the season getting hurt, it's not going to bode well for us. It is not going to bode well for us. So that's another thing to consider with expectations. Also, the final thing I'm going to say is I think around March, and I'm going to say the beginning of March, that's when you can kind of start saying, okay, playoff team or not. Because you should, if you're a top 4 seed, you should be, you're going to be a top 4 seed if you're a top 4 seed already in that time, unless you get like a major injury. If you're a 5th to 8th seed, there's going to be some shuffling at that time. So, and let me add this caveat. It also depends on the distance between 4 and 5. Because if there's like a game or 2 difference, you could go ahead and include both viewpoints together. Like say, okay, there could be some shuffling between 4 and 8. But I think 1 through 3 will be firmly cemented. And that's something you're going to have to be privy to. You know, let's just say it's 60 games have gone by and we're 40 and 20, right? You're going to sit there and say, well, this team is probably going to make the playoffs. You know, even if they were to go out and lose like 10 of the next, 20 games, they're still 40 and 30. You know, they should still have a firm position on the playoffs. Which none of us would think they would go 50% the rest of the way. I mean, that just wouldn't seem, plausible. Especially if they got off the 40-20 start, unless there were a bunch of injuries. So, you should start looking at the record, I'd say around March. And that's when you can start to figure out, okay, where this team is. And now you got to start looking at seeding. And then you can start, I think, drawing up a reasonable conclusion of playoff standings. Or where they should be in the playoffs. But, yeah, that's all I got. I'm still on my way to work. Y'all let me know how y'all like this video. And I guess I'll catch y'all later. Peace.